It was a quiet Sunday evening in the small city of Abilene, Texas, the kind of evening where most families were winding down, preparing for another week of school, work, and routine. But inside one modest family home, a tragedy was about to unfold, one that would shock the community, devastate a mother, and leave people around the world struggling to comprehend how something so horrific could happen within the walls of a seemingly ordinary household. This is the story of Paris Bennett, a boy who appeared gifted, intelligent, and capable of anything, and of his little sister Ella Bennett, just 4 years old, full of life and innocence. It is the story of a murder that wasn't committed in a moment of rage or confusion, but rather in cold, calculated detail. And it is the story of a mother, Charity Lee, who would spend the rest of her life haunted by the night she lost one child to death and another to prison. The family background. To understand this case, we have to go back before that February night in 2007. Charity Lee was no stranger to hardship. As a young woman, she had battled addiction and worked hard to rebuild her life. By the time her children were born, she was focused on being the best mother she could be. She poured her love and attention into her children. Paris, her bright and precocious son, and Ella, her playful and sweet daughter. Paris was unusual from the very beginning. He had an IQ of 141, placing him well into the genius range. He excelled in school and had a talent for languages and literature. To outsiders, he looked like the kind of boy any parent would be proud of, a child destined for greatness. Ella, meanwhile, was the light of the family. At 4 years old, she loved cartoons, dolls, and playing with her big brother. She followed Paris around the house, adoring him as little sisters often do. But beneath the surface, Paris harbored something darker. He had a tendency toward control, a streak of manipulation, and a hidden resentment toward his mother. Years earlier, at just 8 years old, he had confessed to fantasizing about killing Charity after she disciplined him. Those thoughts were brushed aside as childish anger. No one could have imagined that one day they would become horrifying reality. The night of the murder. On February 4th, 2007, everything changed. That evening, Paris and Ella were at home with a babysitter while their mother, Charity, went out with friends. At just 13 years old, Paris was already manipulative and persuasive. That night, he convinced the babysitter to leave early, assuring her that everything would be fine. After all, he was almost a teenager, responsible enough, or so it seemed. But as soon as the babysitter walked out the door, Paris made a decision that would alter the course of his family's life forever. Sometime before midnight, he quietly entered Ella's room. She was fast asleep in her bed, tucked in with her blanket and toys. Without hesitation, Paris picked up a kitchen knife he had taken earlier and attacked his little sister. He stabbed Ella 17 times, the violence of the act shocking even seasoned investigators later on. She was just 4 years old, fragile, defenseless, and trusting of her brother. The brutality didn't end with the attack. After the stabbing, Paris calmly picked up the phone and called a friend. He spoke casually, making no mention of what had just happened. Only after hanging up did he dial 911. On the emergency call, Paris's tone was chilling. He claimed he was hallucinating, saying that Ella had looked like a pumpkin-headed demon. When the dispatcher instructed him to perform CPR, he pretended to do so. By the time authorities arrived, it was far too late. Ella was gone. The motive. At first, investigators wondered if this was the act of a boy who had simply snapped. But Paris's confession revealed something far more disturbing. This was not a crime of passion. It was not a random act of violence. It was planned. Paris admitted that the murder was not about Ella herself. It was about their mother. He wanted to punish Charity. In his words, killing her would have been too simple. Her pain would have ended with her death. But by murdering Ella, the child she adored, Paris knew he could inflict a wound on his mother that would never heal. This was his revenge, cold, deliberate, and calculated. The aftermath. When police arrived, they found Paris calm and collected. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He simply confessed to what he had done. Charity, who had been out with friends, returned home to a nightmare. She had lost both of her children in a single night, one dead, the other arrested for murder. The case quickly made national headlines. The details were too shocking to ignore. A 13-year-old genius killing his own sister, not in anger, but with careful planning and a twisted sense of purpose. In court, Paris was tried as a juvenile. He pleaded guilty to capital murder and received the maximum sentence available under Texas law for someone his age, 40 years in prison. He would be eligible for parole in 2027. Psychiatric evaluations later described Paris as showing strong psychopathic traits, manipulative, remorseless, and unlikely to ever change. Even in prison, he seemed proud of what he had done. He openly admitted that his goal had been to cause his mother the greatest possible suffering. Life after Ella. For Charity, the years that followed were filled with unimaginable pain. She had to navigate the loss of her daughter while still grappling with the reality that her son was her daughter's killer. At first, she visited Paris in prison. She wrote to him, tried to maintain some connection, and searched for answers. But over time, she realized that Paris was not remorseful. In interviews and letters, he displayed arrogance and even bragged about the crime. By 2021, Charity made the painful decision to cut off all contact with him, especially after learning that he had been romantically involved with a woman who had plotted a mass shooting. Charity turned her grief into advocacy. She became a public speaker, sharing her story with others who had faced trauma and loss. She appeared in the 2017 documentary The Family I Had, which examined the devastating ripple effects of Ella's murder. Through it all, she continued to fight for healing, for herself and for others. The legacy of the case. The murder of Ella Bennett remains one of the most disturbing cases in Texas criminal history. It forces us to confront difficult questions. How can someone so young commit such calculated evil? Was Paris born this way, or did something in his upbringing shape him into a killer? To this day, experts debate whether Paris Bennett is simply a psychopath beyond rehabilitation or a tragic example of untreated mental illness. What is certain, however, is that his actions destroyed his family. Ella's short life is remembered by those who knew her as joyful, innocent, and full of love. Her mother continues to honor her memory, even as she carries the scars of that night. And Paris remains behind bars, awaiting the day when he will face the possibility of parole. A day that terrifies many who know his story. The case of Ella Bennett is not just a story of murder. It is a story of betrayal, of innocence stolen, and of the haunting reality that sometimes the greatest danger comes not from strangers, but from within our own homes. For Charity Lee, the pain is eternal. She lost the daughter she adored and the son she once believed in. For the rest of us, the case is a chilling reminder of how fragile life can be, and how quickly it can be shattered by the choices of others.